The radio crackled with static, then silence. That was the first sign something had gone catastrophically wrong in the mountains of northeastern Afghanistan. At 3:47 hours, Bravo team's transmission cut to dead air mid-sentence, their last words haunting the operations center. "We have movement on all ridgelines, requesting immediate," then nothing. The kind of nothing that makes seasoned operators check their equipment twice and junior analysts reach for their coffee with trembling hands. Major Katerina Raven Volkov pressed her headset closer, waiting for any sign of life from the 12 Navy SEALs who had vanished into what intelligence reports called a routine reconnaissance mission. Routine. In Afghanistan, that word had become a bitter joke, especially in the Korangal Valley, where mountains swallowed radio signals and enemy fighters knew every cave, every shadow, every killing field carved into the ancient stone. The mission had seemed straightforward enough on paper. Bravo team would infiltrate a suspected Taliban communications hub, gather intelligence on a high-value target, and extract before dawn. Standard operating procedure for America's most elite warriors. But the mountains had other plans. Weather reports showed a sudden storm system rolling in from the Hindu Kush, bringing with it the kind of low-hanging clouds that turned helicopters into sitting ducks and made close air support impossible. Or so everyone believed. Raven stood in the Tactical Operations Center, her flight suit still carrying the smell of jet fuel and hydraulic fluid from her last sortie. Around her, staff officers shuffled papers and spoke in hushed tones about contingency plans and acceptable losses. The words made her jaw clench. These weren't acceptable losses. These were 12 American warriors trapped behind enemy lines, and the clock was ticking. "Weather's not clearing until 800, announced Colonel Hayes, the mission commander whose desk-bound perspective showed in every calculated pause. "No way to get assets in there. We'll have to wait it out." His tone carried the resigned acceptance of someone who had never felt rotor wash or pulled G-forces that tested the limits of human consciousness. But Raven had felt both. More importantly, she had felt something else, the weight of knowing that when conventional wisdom said impossible, that's exactly when the impossible became necessary. She studied the weather reports again, noting wind patterns and ceiling heights that others dismissed as prohibitive. Her fingers traced elevation maps with the kind of intimate knowledge that came from flying these valleys for 3 consecutive deployments. The silence stretched longer. Somewhere out there, 12 SEALs were learning the true meaning of being alone. "I can get through," Raven said quietly, her words cutting through the operations center chatter like a blade through silk. Every conversation stopped. Every eye turned to the woman whose call sign had been earned in the most unforgiving classroom of all, combat. Colonel Hayes looked up from his charts, his expression mixing skepticism with the kind of patronizing smile reserved for subordinates who didn't understand the bigger picture. "Captain Volkov, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but the weather reports are clear. No aircraft are getting through that soup. The ceiling's at 200 feet with zero visibility." Raven's dark eyes held steady, unflinching. "Sir, with respect, I didn't say it would be easy. I said I could get through." There was something in her voice, not arrogance, not recklessness, but the quiet certainty of someone who had stared death in the face before and learned its tells. "Apache can fly nap of the earth. I know these valleys." The operations center erupted in murmurs. Some officers shook their heads, others whispered about the impossibility of the mission parameters. But Raven wasn't listening to them anymore. She was thinking about 12 warriors who had trusted in American air power to have their backs, and how that trust was about to be tested in the crucible of an Afghan storm. Her call sign wasn't chosen randomly. Ravens were creatures that thrived in conditions that grounded other birds. They were symbols of prophecy and intelligence, birds that could navigate through darkness when eagles stayed grounded. Tonight, that symbolism would be put to its ultimate test. The mission clock showed 3:52 hours. Every minute of delay meant the enemy had more time to consolidate their position, More time to turn a simple reconnaissance gone wrong into a massacre that would haunt the operators who survived and the families who didn't get their warriors home. Colonel Hayes studied the weather data one more time, his fingers drumming against the metal desk. The drumming stopped. Even if you could get through the weather, Captain, which I doubt, you'd be flying solo into unknown enemy positions with no backup, no close air support, and no guaranteed extraction route. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. I can't authorize a suicide mission. It's not suicide if you know what you're doing, Raven replied, her voice carrying 3 tours of combat experience and the kind of confidence that couldn't be faked. Sir, I've studied every ridge, every draw, every landing zone in that sector. I know where the thermals rise and where the downdrafts hide. More importantly, I know where the enemy doesn't expect an Apache to appear. The silence stretched again, but this time it carried a different quality. This wasn't the silence of resignation. It was the silence of decision. Around the operations center, junior officers waited to see which way the wind would blow. Would command choose the safe path of waiting for better conditions, or would they bet everything on one pilot's claim that she could do the impossible? Outside, the storm continued building, its winds carrying the promise of violence to come. The radio crackled again, this time with a different voice. Bravo 6, the team leader, his transmission broken and desperate. Base, this is Bravo 6. We have enemy contact, multiple positions. Need immediate extraction. We are taking heavy fire and have 2 wounded. The transmission cut off, replaced by static that sounded like the breathing of some electronic beast. The operations center exploded into activity. Officers reached for phones, analysts pulled up satellite imagery, and planners began calculating response times for conventional assets. But conventional assets couldn't fly in these conditions, and everyone knew it. Colonel Hayes looked at Raven again, this time seeing past the gender, past the skepticism, past the conventional wisdom that said helicopters didn't fly in weather like this. He saw a pilot who had never failed to bring her crews home, who had earned her call sign by navigating through conditions that would have claimed lesser aviators. "What do you need?" he asked, his voice carrying the weight of command decision. Raven was already moving toward the door, her mind shifting into mission planning mode. Full fuel, full ammunition load, and clearance to fly at my discretion. No radio chatter unless it's mission critical. I'll be running dark and low. She paused at the threshold, looking back at the room full of officers who were about to witness something extraordinary. "And sir, when I bring them home, remember this moment. Remember that sometimes the impossible is just another word for untested." The door closed behind her with a metallic click that sounded like a bullet sliding into a chamber. In the operations center, Colonel Hayes reached for his radio, knowing he was about to authorize something that would either become legend or tragedy. There was no middle ground in missions like this, only success or failure, only life or death, only the kind of moments that defined careers and haunted dreams. Flight operations, this is base. Authorize immediate launch for Apache 77. Solo mission, pilot's discretion on route and altitude. He paused, then added the words that would echo through military aviation history. Call sign Raven is cleared for immediate departure. Weather conditions are pilot's discretion. The response came back immediately. Base, flight ops, copy authorization for Apache 77. Weather is still reporting 0 visibility with severe turbulence. Recommend delay until conditions improve. Negative, flight ops. Mission is time critical. Raven is cleared for immediate departure. Colonel Hayes set down the radio and looked at the weather reports one more time. The numbers hadn't changed, ceiling at 200 feet, visibility near 0, winds gusting to 40 knots. Any rational analysis would ground every aircraft on the base. But rationality and necessity didn't always align. Sometimes, the mission required more than rational analysis. Sometimes, it required faith in the kind of pilot who earned call signs like Raven. Outside, the first drops of rain began hitting the operations center windows. The storm had arrived, and with it, the test of whether American air power could adapt when conventional tactics failed. In a few minutes, one pilot and one Apache helicopter would find out if the impossible was just another mission parameter to overcome. The clock showed 3:58 hours. 12 SEALs were running out of time, and the weather was getting worse. But somewhere in the darkness, rotor blades were beginning to turn. Raven moved through the pre-flight checklist with the methodical precision of someone who knew that missing a single step could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Her fingers moved across switches and gauges with practiced efficiency, each action backed by thousands of hours of flight time in conditions that ranged from challenging to impossible. The Apache AH-64E Guardian, tail number 705437, sat on the tarmac like a predator waiting to hunt. Its angular lines and weapon systems gave it the appearance of some technological raptor, built for one purpose, bringing overwhelming firepower to America's enemies. But tonight, those weapons would be secondary to its most important cargo, the skill and determination of its pilot. Chief Warrant Officer Miguel Santos appeared at the aircraft's side, his crew chief badge reflecting the harsh floodlights that illuminated the flight line. Santos had been turning wrenches on military helicopters for 15 years, and he knew the sound of trouble before most pilots even realized they had problems. More importantly, he knew Raven's flying style: aggressive, precise, and absolutely uncompromising when lives were on the line. "Birds ready, Captain," Santos reported, his voice carrying over the wind that was beginning to pick up strength. "Full fuel, full ammo load for the 30 Mike, and I've loaded extra flares. Weather's going to mess with your instruments once you get into those valleys." He paused, studying the storm clouds that were beginning to obscure the mountains. "Ma'am, I've been working on helicopters since before you had wings on your chest, and I've never seen anyone try to fly in conditions like this." Raven continued her external inspection, checking rotor blade condition and weapon system alignment with the kind of attention to detail that separated professional aviators from those who became cautionary tailies. "Santos, how long have you been my crew chief?" 2 years, ma'am, every sortie since you got here." "In those 2 years, how many times have I brought this bird back damaged?" Santos considered the question, running through memory of countless missions. Combat flights into hot landing zones, close air support missions that put the Apache danger close to friendly forces, reconnaissance flights that skirted the edge of enemy air defenses. "Never, ma'am. You've never brought her back with so much as a bullet hole." "That's because I don't take unnecessary risks," Raven said, completing her inspection and moving toward the cockpit. "But sometimes, what looks like an unnecessary risk to everyone else is just another mission parameter to work around." She paused at the aircraft's door, looking back at Santos. 12 SEALs are counting on someone being willing to work around tonight's parameters." The crew chief nodded, understanding passing between them without further words. He had seen enough combat to know when a mission crossed the line from routine to historic, and tonight felt different. Tonight felt like the kind of mission that people would talk about for decades, assuming anyone lived to tell the story. Raven climbed into the cockpit, her movements fluid and economical. The Apache's interior was a familiar environment of switches, displays, and controls that had become extensions of her own nervous system. She strapped in with practiced efficiency, then began the startup sequence that would transform a silent machine into a weapon of war. "Flight operations, Apache 77 requesting clearance for immediate departure," she transmitted, her voice professionally calm despite the magnitude of what she was about to attempt. "Apache 77, Flight Ops. Current weather shows 0 visibility, 200-foot ceiling, winds gusting to 40 knots. Recommend delay until conditions improve." "Flight Ops 77. I have authorization from base for immediate departure, pilot's discretion on weather." Raven's fingers continued moving across switches, bringing systems online with the mechanical precision of ritual. Requesting clearance for departure to the northwest, low-level flight profile. There was a pause before the response came back, the flight operations controller clearly consulting with higher authority. 7-7, Flight Ops, you are cleared for departure. Switch to tactical frequency once airborne. Good luck, Raven. The rotor blades began their slow rotation, gradually building speed until they became a blur of carbon fiber and engineering precision. The Apache lifted slightly on its landing gear, then settled back as Raven completed her final instrument checks. Everything showed green. All systems were functioning within normal parameters, which meant that the only variable left to control was the one that mattered most, her own skill as a pilot. The radio crackled with another transmission from Bravo Team. Base, Bravo 6, enemy contact is intensifying. We have multiple wounded and are taking fire from elevated positions. Request immediate air support. The transmission was clearer this time, but the desperation in the team leader's voice was unmistakable. Raven keyed her microphone. Bravo 6, this is Raven. I'm inbound to your position. Estimated time of arrival 25 minutes. Keep your heads down and mark your positions with IR strobes. I'll find you. The response came back immediately. Raven, Bravo 6, negative on air support. Weather conditions are prohibitive for flight operations. No aircraft are authorized to. Bravo 6, Raven is already airborne. The Apache lifted from the ground, its engine spinning up to full power as it rose into the storm-dark sky. I'll see you in 25 minutes. The last thing Raven heard before switching to tactical frequency was the sound of silence, the kind that followed when professional warriors realized that someone was about to attempt the impossible on their behalf. The Apache climbed through the first layer of clouds, visibility dropping to zero as moisture began condensing on the cockpit glass. Raven switched to instrument flight, her training taking over as the outside world disappeared into a gray void. This was the moment when lesser pilots would turn back, when common sense would override mission necessity. But Raven had learned long ago that common sense and combat operations existed in different universes. The Apache disappeared into the storm, its navigation lights quickly swallowed by clouds and distance. On the ground, Santos watched until there was nothing left to see, then turned back toward the hangar. He had work to do, preparing for the possibility that his pilot would need immediate maintenance support when she returned. If she returned. The weather continued to deteriorate, wind gusts now approaching 50 knots with rain that fell in sheets across the airfield. In the operations center, Colonel Hayes monitored multiple radio frequencies, listening for any word from either Bravo Team or the Apache that had just disappeared into conditions that should have grounded every aircraft on the base. At 4:12 hours, the last ground-based radio contact with Raven was logged. Base 7-7, entering storm system, switching to terrain-following radar. Next contact will be from target area. Then silence. The kind of silence that made professional soldiers check their weapons and amateur analysts update their resumes. In the Afghan mountains, silence usually meant one of two things: mission success or complete disaster. For the next 20 minutes, 12 Navy SEALs and one Apache pilot would exist in a space where only skill, determination, and a little bit of luck would determine which outcome prevailed. The mountains waited in the darkness, their ancient stone indifferent to the human drama playing out in the valleys below. Storm clouds clung to their peaks like smoke from some primordial fire, creating a maze of wind shears and downdrafts that had claimed aircraft before and would claim aircraft again. But tonight, those mountains would meet someone who had learned to speak their language. The Apache descended through the storm system like a mechanical falcon diving through clouds, its pilot navigating by instruments an instinct through conditions that would have grounded commercial aviation for days. Raven kept the aircraft at minimum safe altitude, using terrain-following radar to maintain clearance above the ridgelines while staying below the worst of the weather. This was flying in its purest form. No autopilot, no safety margins, no backup plans. Just one pilot, one machine, and the kind of flying that separated legends from casualties. The Apache bucked and fought against wind gusts that tried to slam it into mountainsides, but Raven's hands remained steady on the controls, making constant small adjustments that kept them in controlled flight. Her headset crackled with static as she tried to raise Bravo Team on their tactical frequency. Bravo 6, Raven, I'm inbound to your grid coordinates. What's your status? The response came back broken and desperate. Raven, heavy contact, elevated positions, 2 urgent casualties, running low on ammunition. Bravo 6, can you mark your position with IR strobes? I'm flying instruments and need a visual reference for your location. Roger, Raven, IR strobes activated. Be advised, enemy has heavy machine guns on the ridgelines. They have excellent fields of fire on the valley floor. Raven switched her targeting system to thermal imaging, scanning the valley floor for the infrared signatures that would indicate friendly positions. The storm made everything more difficult. Precipitation scattered the thermal signatures, and the cold mountain air created temperature inversions that played havoc with the Apache sensors. But gradually, patterns began emerging from the electronic noise. Heat signatures that moved with tactical precision rather than random motion. Muzzle flashes from positions that suggested coordinated defense rather than chaotic retreat. And there, 4 distinct infrared strobes arranged in a tactical formation that screamed American Special Operations. Bravo 6, I have visual on your IR markers. Count 4 strobes in defensive positions. Confirm your location. Raven, Bravo 6 confirms. We are in a defensive perimeter approximately 200 meters northwest of the primary target building. Enemy positions are on the ridgelines to our north, east, and south. We need immediate fire support and extraction. Raven studied the tactical situation through her targeting display, noting the enemy positions that Bravo 6 had described. The SEALs were trapped in a kill box, surrounded on 3 sides by elevated enemy positions that commanded excellent fields of fire. It was a textbook ambush, professionally executed by fighters who understood how to use terrain to their advantage, which meant that conventional tactics would get everyone killed. Bravo 6, I need you to mark enemy positions with laser designators if you have them. I'm going to make a gun run from the south, then extract your team from the valley floor. Negative, Raven. Enemy has anti-aircraft weapons. We observed RPG fire earlier, and intelligence suggests possible MANPADS in the area. Recommend you abort and wait for conventional air support. Raven considered the recommendation for approximately 2 seconds, then dismissed it. Conventional air support couldn't operate in these weather conditions, and waiting for improved conditions meant watching 12 American warriors die while she flew in circles. That wasn't an acceptable outcome. Bravo 6, I didn't come this far to turn around now. Mark the targets and keep your heads down. I'm beginning my attack run. The Apache banked sharply to the right, descending toward the valley floor at an angle that would have triggered every safety protocol in flight school. But flight school didn't prepare pilots for missions like this, missions where the book had to be thrown out, and success depended entirely on individual skill and determination. Raven's targeting system locked onto the first enemy position, a heavy machine gun nest carved into the rock face approximately 400 meters above the trapped SEALs. The 30 chain gun responded to her targeting inputs, traversing toward the threat with mechanical precision. At this range, in these conditions, she would get one chance to neutralize the position before return fire made her own position untenable. The gun fired in a controlled burst, high-explosive rounds impacting the target area with devastating effect. Through her thermal imaging system, Raven watched enemy heat signatures disappear as the position was destroyed. One down, at least 6 more to go. But the attack run had revealed her position to every enemy fighter in the valley. Muzzle flashes erupted from multiple locations as small arms fire reached toward the Apache. Most of it fell short, but Raven could hear the distinctive crack of bullets passing close to the aircraft. Bravo 6, first target neutralized. I'm repositioning for attack on the eastern ridge. Keep marking targets with your lasers. Roger, Raven. Be advised, we have movement in the target building. Possible high-value personnel attempting to escape through the back entrance. That changed everything. The primary mission had been intelligence gathering on a high-value target. If that target was attempting to escape while the SEALs were pinned down, the entire operation could be lost regardless of successful extraction. Raven made a decision that would define her career and potentially save or doom 12 lives. Instead of continuing with systematic suppression of enemy positions, she would attempt something that no Apache pilot had ever tried in conditions like these. She would land in the valley and extract the SEALs while simultaneously preventing the high-value target from escaping. It was tactically insane, logistically impossible, and absolutely necessary. Bravo 6, I'm setting down in the valley floor northwest of your position. Prepare for immediate extraction and have your fastest runner ready to interdict the target building. We're going to finish this mission right here, right now. The silence that followed her transmission lasted exactly 3 seconds, the time it took for professional warriors to process something they had never heard before. Then Bravo 6's voice came back, carrying a mixture of disbelief and determination. Roger, Raven. We'll be ready. The Apache descended toward the valley floor like a predator claiming its territory. Storm clouds swirled around its rotors, rain lashed its armored hull, and enemy fire reached up from concealed positions. But Captain Katerina Volkov had made her decision, and now the mountains would learn what happened when an unstoppable force met terrain that had never been conquered. In the operations center back at base, Colonel Hayes monitored radio transmissions with growing amazement. What had started as a routine extraction had become something unprecedented. A single pilot attempting to complete a mission that conventional military doctrine said was impossible. The radio crackled with Raven's voice. Base, this is 7-7. Beginning landing approach in hostile territory. If you don't hear from me in 30 minutes, tell Santos his bird flew perfectly. Then the transmission ended, replaced by static that sounded like the breathing of history itself. The Apache touched down on a rocky outcropping barely large enough to accommodate its landing gear, rotor wash scattering loose stones and debris in all directions. Enemy fire intensified as Raven became a stationary target, bullets sparking off armored surfaces and spiderwebbing the cockpit glass. But the aircraft held its position, its engines running at combat power, ready for immediate departure. Through the storm and gunfire, 12 figures moved with the deadly precision that identified them as America's most elite warriors. They bounded from cover to cover, suppressing enemy positions with disciplined fire, while one of their number sprinted toward the target building, where intelligence assets were attempting to escape. Raven maintained covering fire with the Apache's chain gun, systematically engaging enemy positions that threatened the extraction. Her ammunition counter showed decreasing numbers as high-explosive rounds found their targets, but the enemy kept firing from concealed positions that seemed to multiply with each passing minute. Raven, Bravo 6. We have the package. Repeat, we have secured the high-value target. Request immediate extraction. We are taking heavy fire from multiple positions. Copy, Bravo 6. Load your wounded first, then the package, then the rest of the team. Move fast, we're taking fire and I can't hold this position much longer. The next 90 seconds would be remembered as the longest minute and a half in recent military aviation history. SEALs moved wounded teammates into the Apache's cargo compartment, while bullets sparked off the aircraft's armor. The captured high-value target, a Taliban communications coordinator whose intelligence would save dozens of American lives, was secured in the center of the passenger compartment. Raven, all personnel on board. We are ready for immediate departure. Captain Katerina Volkov applied power to the Apache's engines, feeling the aircraft strain against its maximum gross weight as it lifted from the valley floor. Overloaded with personnel and low on fuel, the helicopter clawed for altitude through weather that was steadily deteriorating. Enemy fire followed them up from the valley floor, tracers creating deadly light shows in the storm-dark sky. But gradually, the Apache climbed above effective range of small arms fire, disappearing once again into the clouds that had seemed like an insurmountable obstacle just 2 hours earlier. Base, this is 7-7. Package secure, all personnel accounted for, inbound for immediate medical attention for wounded personnel. Estimated time of arrival 22 minutes. The response from Colonel Hayes came back immediately. 7-7, base copies all. Outstanding work, Raven. Medical personnel are standing by for your arrival. But Raven wasn't listening to congratulations. She was focused on flying an overloaded helicopter through a storm system that was still trying to kill everyone on board. The mission wasn't complete until every person was safely on the ground, and the weather was getting worse with each passing minute. The Apache fought its way through wind shears and downdrafts that tested both aircraft and pilot to their limits. Ice began forming on the rotor blades, threatening to upset the delicate balance that kept them airborne. But Captain Volkov had learned to fly in conditions that other pilots only read about, and tonight those lessons were keeping 12 SEALs alive. As they cleared the last ridgeline before base, Raven allowed herself one moment of satisfaction. What had started as an impossible mission had become a textbook example of what happened when skill, determination, and a little bit of luck converged in the right place at the right time. The Apache approached the airfield with all navigation lights blazing, a beacon of success cutting through the storm. On the ground, medical personnel waited with stretchers and ambulances, ready to treat wounded warriors who had given everything for their country and the pilot who had risked everything to bring them home. Captain Katerina, Raven, Volkov had just redefined what was possible in military aviation. More importantly, she had proven that sometimes the impossible was just another word for untested. As the Apache settled onto the tarmac, its rotors gradually slowing from combat speed to idle, Raven completed her post-flight shutdown checklist with the same methodical precision she had used for the entire mission. But inside, she allowed herself a small smile. 12 American warriors were home. The mission was complete, and somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan, enemy fighters were learning that American air power had just evolved beyond their ability to predict or counter. The storm continued raging outside, but it no longer mattered. History had been made in the darkness, and the legend of Raven was just beginning. Chief Santos appeared at the aircraft's side before the rotors had completely stopped turning, his experienced eyes scanning for damage that would need immediate attention. What he found surprised him. Despite flying through conditions that should have destroyed the aircraft and enemy fire that should have crippled it, Apache 7-7 showed only minor battle damage. A few bullet holes in non-critical areas, some stress fractures in the rotor blades that could be easily repaired, and carbon scoring from muzzle flashes that had come too close for comfort. But the aircraft had performed flawlessly, just as its pilot had promised. "How's she look, Santos?" Raven asked as she climbed down from the cockpit, her flight suit soaked with perspiration despite the cold mountain air. "Like she's been through a war, ma'am, but nothing that can't be fixed by morning." Santos paused, studying his pilot with the kind of professional respect that couldn't be faked. "Ma'am, in 15 years of turning wrenches on military helicopters, I've never seen flying like what you just did. That was, that was something special." Medical personnel were already loading wounded SEALs into ambulances, their professional efficiency ensuring that every injured warrior received immediate attention. But even as they worked, Raven could see them glancing in her direction with the kind of curiosity reserved for someone who had just accomplished the impossible. Colonel Hayes approached from the operations center, his earlier skepticism replaced by something that looked remarkably like awe. "Captain Volkov, I owe you an apology. What you just accomplished—" He paused, searching for words adequate to describe what had just occurred. "What you just accomplished is going to be studied in flight schools for the next 50 years. "Sir, I just did what any pilot would have done in the same situation," Raven replied, but her commanding officer was already shaking his head. "No, Captain. What you did tonight was unprecedented. Flying in zero visibility weather, conducting close air support in mountainous terrain, landing in a hostile valley under fire, and extracting personnel while engaging enemy positions. That's not standard operating procedure. That's the definition of exceptional." Around them, the airfield buzzed with activity as wounded SEALs received medical attention, and the captured high-value target was transferred to intelligence personnel for interrogation. But gradually, as word spread about what had just occurred, personnel began gathering near Apache 77. They came in small groups at first: mechanics, intelligence analysts, support personnel who had monitored the mission from the safety of the base. Then larger groups arrived: pilots who wanted to see the aircraft that had just completed an impossible mission, ground personnel who had listened to radio transmissions that redefined what they thought was possible in military aviation. Within an hour, what started as professional curiosity had become something approaching a pilgrimage. Personnel from across the base found reasons to walk past Apache 77 to see the bullet holes and battle damage that proved the mission had been real. More importantly, they came to see the pilot who had just demonstrated that sometimes individual skill and determination could overcome seemingly impossible odds. But Raven didn't notice the attention. She was focused on the mission debrief, working with intelligence personnel to ensure that every detail of the operation was properly documented. The high-value target had already provided information that would save American lives, and the successful extraction had preserved one of the most elite special operations teams in the military. Later, much later, when the immediate operational requirements had been satisfied, Raven finally allowed herself to consider what had just occurred. She had flown through weather conditions that grounded commercial aviation, conducted combat operations in mountainous terrain that challenged the limits of rotorcraft performance, and completed a mission that conventional military doctrine said was impossible. More importantly, she had brought 12 American warriors home alive. That night, as storm clouds gradually cleared from the Afghan mountains, personnel throughout the base found reasons to stay awake a little longer, to share coffee and conversation about what they had witnessed. The story grew with each telling, not because anyone exaggerated the facts, but because the facts themselves were so extraordinary that they required multiple perspectives to be fully understood. In the medical facility, wounded SEALs recovered from their injuries, while telling anyone who would listen about the Apache pilot who had appeared out of a storm like something from mythology. Their descriptions were consistent: professional, fearless, and absolutely uncompromising when American lives were on the line. "She came out of nowhere," Petty Officer Rodriguez explained to a Navy corpsman who was changing his bandages. "1 minute we're pinned down by enemy fire, thinking we're going to die in that valley. The next minute, we hear rotors and see muzzle flashes from an Apache chain gun. Then she lands right in the middle of the firefight and tells us to load up like it's just another day at the office." The corpsman nodded, having heard similar stories from other wounded SEALs. What was she like, the pilot? Rodriguez considered the question carefully. Calm, professional, like she'd done it 1,000 times before. But there was something else. She wasn't just doing her job. She was bringing us home, and failure wasn't an option she was willing to consider. Similar conversations were occurring throughout the base as personnel tried to process what they had witnessed. In the operations center, Colonel Hayes was completing mission reports that would eventually reach the highest levels of military command. But even his clinical military language couldn't fully capture what Captain Katerina Volkov had accomplished. "Mission successful," he wrote. "All personnel extracted without loss. High-value targets secured. Aircraft performed within acceptable parameters despite extreme weather conditions and enemy contact." The words were accurate but inadequate. They described the outcome without capturing the extraordinary nature of what had been required to achieve that outcome. In her quarters, Raven finally allowed exhaustion to catch up with her. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the mission was fading, replaced by the bone-deep fatigue that followed combat operations. But as she prepared for sleep, she thought about the 12 SEALs who were alive because someone had been willing to attempt the impossible. That thought made the exhaustion worthwhile. It made everything worthwhile. Outside her window, the storm was finally beginning to clear. Stars appeared between breaks in the clouds, their light reflecting off mountains that had witnessed something remarkable. For the first time in hours, the weather was calm enough for normal flight operations. But normal flight operations wouldn't have saved Bravo Team. Normal flight operations wouldn't have extracted the high-value target who was already providing intelligence that would save American lives. Normal flight operations were designed for normal circumstances, and tonight had been anything but normal. Captain Katerina, Raven Volkov closed her eyes and allowed sleep to take her, secure in the knowledge that when the impossible became necessary, she had proven equal to the challenge. Tomorrow would bring new missions, new challenges, new opportunities to demonstrate that American air power could adapt to overcome any obstacle. But tonight 12 warriors were alive, and that was enough. In the months that followed, the story of Raven's mission would spread throughout the military aviation community like wildfire. Flight instructors would use it as an example of what could be accomplished when skill, determination, and calculated risk-taking converged at exactly the right moment. Intelligence analysts would study the successful capture of the high-value target as a textbook example of adaptive mission planning. But for the 12 SEALs of Bravo Team, the story was simpler and more personal. When conventional wisdom said rescue was impossible, one pilot had proven that impossible was just another word for untested. They had learned what it meant to have someone willing to risk everything to bring them home, and that lesson would stay with them for the rest of their military careers. The legend of Raven had been born in the mountains of Afghanistan during a storm that should have grounded all aircraft. It was a legend built on skill, courage, and the kind of determination that defined the finest traditions of American military aviation. And it was only the beginning. 3 months later, the official commendation ceremony took place on the same tarmac where Apache 77 had landed with its cargo of rescued SEALs and captured intelligence assets. The weather was perfect, clear skies,